I'm Tayama, and we have the great pleasure of being here with Rabbi David Ingber to explore Jewish mysticism and healing the broken vessels. Rabbi David Ingber serves as the founding rabbi of Romemu, the largest Jewish renewal synagogue in the United States, and is senior director of Jewish Life and the Bronfman Center at the 92nd Street Y in New York. He serves on the faculty for the Wexner Heritage Program and the Hartman Institute, and was an AJWS Global Justice Fellow. Rabbi Ingber lectures extensively on the topics of spirituality, theology, Jewish mysticism, prayer, and meditation. Welcome, Rabbi David. It's such a pleasure to have you here with us.
It's such a pleasure for me to be with you. It's really, and I'll also begin by saying I'm here in New York City, so there might be some ambient sounds that are coming our way. So that's all part of the daily spiritual practice of kind of hearing it as a kind of meditation bell.
Thank you so much for that. What does it mean to be a Jewish mystic?
So I think that to be a Jewish mystic, like maybe what it means to be any mystic, is to have a relationship with both the seen and the unseen worlds. Like that's at least the way that it appears to me this morning. I feel that to be a Jewish mystic, of course, is to be within a tradition, a very specific tradition of mystical practices and also mystical ideas or mystical philosophical ways of looking at the universe. But the unique path of the Jewish mystic is, I think, not altogether different than the universal mystic path, which is the most important piece of it, I guess, would be the lived experience of the divine, or the lived experience of spirit as it is manifest in all of this, right, in all form and formless, and we have different language for it and beautiful frames, and some of them are very different than other traditional paths. But as a perennialist, someone who's very drawn to all of the different traditions and that which is both dissimilar, but also most importantly, what is alike in all of them. I think the Jewish mystic is part of that great chavraya, that great fellowship of those who have eyes that see the phenomenal world, the world of tables and computers and bodies, and also who have the inner eye to have had an experience of a taste of the implicate, of that which is known by all those names, but known really through that experience of oneness, of the experience of connection to divinity. And as a Jewish mystic, we'll use language like Ein Sof, the infinite one, or the language of the Shekhinah, the divine feminine. We have our own mystical dictionary and glossary of terms, and we have beautiful frameworks, one of which we'll be exploring, I think, in a moment. But at its heart, to be a Jewish mystic is to be a partner in that. I'll say one more piece about what maybe a unique Jewish mystical piece, because I talked about what we have in common, but what I think what a unique Jewish mystical piece is being in relationship with the divine, being a partner with the divine. And in Kabbalistic sources, that partnership runs the gamut from being a friend, a re'ah, or yedid, as we would say, a friend of the divine, to being, in some radical ways, like a marriage therapist, being the one who brings together the estranged divine mother and the estranged divine father, and trying to bring peace between those divine masculine and divine feminine pieces within us and outside of us. That's the language of Kabbalah, of Jewish mysticism. And so I think that to be a Jewish mystic is to be looking for ways that we can both experience the divine, but also repair those places. And I think that's a unique language of the Jewish mystic, is the one who is looking for tikkun, looking to find ways to mend and repair a world that often doesn't feel very aligned with that unity that we've experienced. And so I think that's where I might talk about it today.
I'm so moved about how you speak to this. Tell us more about Tikkun and this process of repair.
Yeah, so in this beautiful, incredible Jewish mystical canon, the canon of Jewish mystical teachings, which again I think emerges from experience and then are translated into the language of the unique culture and the Jewish culture in particular. Like within that canon, there is maybe perhaps the greatest Kabbalist, the greatest mystic who ever lived, by almost all accounts, was someone named Isaac Luria. And Isaac Luria, who was known as the Irie, which is an acronym of his name, the godly Isaac Luria Eloki, Rabbi Yitzchak, the godly, Rabbi Isaac. He lived in northern Israel for only 2 years in Tzfat, the holy city of Tzfat in northern Israel, for only 2 years. Came from a venerated rabbinic family. He's kind of his whole life is shrouded in mystery, but we do know that he lived in that great city of Tzfat for 2 years in the 1530s. And in that short period of time, he managed to be considered the greatest of all of the mystics that were already living there. And there have been a large, really creative group of mystics and other kinds of scholars that had made their way after the expulsion from Spain in 1492, where the Jews were expelled from Spain and made their way, many of the Jews from the Iberian Peninsula made their way northern Israel to Tzfat. And so when this Rabbi Isaac Luria kind of came for those 2 years, he kind of had been living in Egypt and he's made his way for those 2 years. Essentially within those 2 years, kind of imagine like Thelonious Monk and like, John Coltrane, imagine all the greatest jazz musicians of all time living together and some cat shows up and within 2 years, like he was, the authority and he had a charisma and he was a miracle worker. He could see people's past lives and he could read their stories on their, on their foreheads and on their palms. Really an amazing light. And when he came, when the Irie, Isaac Luria came to Tzfat, he taught for 2 years. And during those 2 years, he kind of laid down a framework for Kabbalah in which he kind of introduced a new myth, a new story about how the world came into being. And according to Isaac Luria, according to the Irie, and this becomes the bedrock of what is known as Lurianic Kabbalah, the world is created by God by a number of moments. There's kind of moments in this mythic drama. The first moment is that God, being infinite, there was no place, as it were, for there to be finitude, anything finite. And so God does what is known in Kabbalah as tzimtzum, which is to withdraw, to pull within, to kind of hyper-focus in a way by pulling away and towards the center. And in this myth, Luria said that all of the world was full of kind of divine energy, divine shefa, divine light. And in order to make that space for the finite to exist, God had to contract God's self. So God pulled God's light in this myth to the sides of a non-spatial universe, which already, trippy. And then into that empty space that was created, which is only seemingly empty, God thread light into that empty space. But the light there was put into vessels that couldn't hold the light for some mysterious reason. And so those initial vessels broke, Luria said. And the vessels broke, and that's known as the breaking of the vessels, Shvirata Kilim. And from that breaking, God then reconstitutes the world, and the next set of vessels are much more able or appropriate for the light that they receive. And from that, the world is born. Now, those broken vessels from the initial attempt to create the world, Luria argued. And in this, those who are listening to this, who might have some exposure to some other traditions, Gnostic traditions and other traditions, we don't know the directionality of influence, whether it was one way or the other. Most scholars say that it was the Jewish version that influenced, the Gnostics, but all of these things are very fluid. But what's really important is that Luria said those first vessels that broke before the second set of vessels that the world is now constructed around, those broken vessels are everywhere. Those shattered pieces remain in this world, like Gnosticism also believed to some degree. But the partnership with us, Luria argued, was that we are like nutcrackers, meaning those shards of light are hidden within the material world. Or we might even say they are part and parcel of the material world, of the phenomenal world, of the table world, of the water bottle world. And through our spiritual practices, we effectuate tikkun, which means literally to fix. We extract that light and we release it, as it were, back to its source through our practices. Now, this is a great, what's called a mashal. It's a great allegory, right? It's a great allegory. But in practice, it means that the Kabbalist uses consciousness and awareness and love and compassion and other sources, other tools in their toolkit in order to locate trapped light, trapped divinity, and to release it. And so, in the application of that, it looks essentially like there isn't any place in the world where you can be. There isn't any situation, any event, any moment where there isn't the possibility for those who are using their spiritual eyes to see, to liberate something that is being held. And in some way, you can hear, Jung talking about the shadow. You can hear those who fight for equality in the world being Kabbalistic in that way. They're trying to find, right, the meaning that's trapped in a moment of trauma, a moment of difficulty, a moment of disorientation, and do the work of tikkun. That's our work in the world, is, where there was darkness, we bring light. Where there was darkness, we find light, would be a Kabbalah. We find the trapped light, that's there, that thing that was an enemy becomes an ally in some way. So that's part of, I think, the work of tikkun, of fixing and repairing.
This is so powerful. Can you say more about how the repair happens, how the trapped light becomes free? You mentioned compassion and love and care and attention as one way, and it would be wonderful to hear more about this.
One of the things that the Lurianic myth said was that in the process of tikkun, in the process of bringing together or discovering something that has been trapped, that the work is both. He begins from the cosmic place, and in his world, the Jewish ritual system, what are called mitzvot or commandments, and various parts of the very ornate, religious observances of the Jews over the last 2,000 years, each of them had a place in releasing various parts of the trapped light, as it were. So when you're about to eat an apple and you make a blessing over the apple, which is the custom amongst the Jews, it's the law, that's Jewish law, that blessing itself, that incanted blessing, is itself the keys, the sacred algorithm that unlocks the light that would otherwise still be trapped in that, material entity. We might call it prana, let's say, kind of like within a yogic tradition where you chew on the food and you're absorbing the prana, the energy, right? The intentionality of the Kabbalist in eating this food and making the blessing beforehand, that itself becomes the releasing of the energy that's trapped in that, as it were. It kind of turns that which is purely material into something that's in service of spirit or something bigger, as it were. And so, but extracting that teaching, and applying it for us, maybe we're not, maybe wherever you are watching this, you might, you're not Jewish or you have a different spiritual tradition. And the practice, though, is essentially the same thing, which is that I think all tikkun is predicated on recognition and on awareness and presence. And so even, let's say, the jealousy that I feel for my brother, let's say, that is, that is lodged somewhere in my back, let's say, or the fear that I have, or the anger, or any of these emotions that are difficult things to be with. The beginning of alienation is to dislocate something and to hide it. Right? We begin to become alienated from parts of the reality, our own fear, our own joy, our own jealousies, our anger, our remorse, our regret. You go through the litany of list of emotions. I think the beginning of breaking the vessel is when the vessel is not large enough to hold it. And that could be for a whole host of reasons. If, it's Pride weekend here in New York, in our synagogue. And so you can grow up, my cousins, I saw them at a wedding last night and grew up in a religious Jewish family, but they knew that he was gay from a very young age. And in many contexts, that would have been judged and criticized and become a place where my cousin would have had to hide. And that hiding, or it would have been the inverse of a search for recognition, of being seen, of being known, of being related and connected, right? And instead, separation happens and what's called pirud, and alienation begins. And so thankfully, he grew up in a home where the parents loved and celebrated who he was, right? And so that created harmony, that created integration, that created the possibility of tikkun, right, in profound ways. So the beginning of alienation is ignoring or something being, split off and said, this isn't real, this isn't true, or this, we don't want this, or, a part of reality that refuses to be acknowledged as part of reality. And so the Kabbalist begins with making space and making a vessel to be in presence with what is. And that is the first step of releasing energy, is like making room for, right? Vessel, we call it vessel formation, right? So when we say kindness, compassion, another way, the reason those qualities were the qualities that I named is because those are usually the things that allow us to make room for something, to make space for something. Like when we're in those mindsets, we can actually include more, right? In a way, the heart expands to include, the vessel of our own consciousness opens to include something that might be there, right? And in that way, I think Luria's, the Irie, was just, it was genius on his part, but he was essentially saying what Freud said much later on, which was where there was, id, there will now be ego. Where there was once shadow, Jung would say, now there is, right, integration of shadow. And that comes through awareness, right? When Freud said you speak it into being, he was saying that which, the primal violation was, the sin was to speak it. We had to not know it, right? And so in our Jewish myth, what happens in the Garden of Eden, which is a story of consciousness, is that, as soon as we ate from the tree, we began to know the world in a way that we had not known it before. And so the fruit of this practice is that we internalize, we eat it, it becomes us, right? We say, oh, this is me too. And then we know, right? What I didn't know, now I know, right? The anger that I refuse to acknowledge becomes, when I make space for it, like now that's a part of me too, right? My jealousies, and writ large. I mean, this, you can imagine this, Taya, this is a conversation about human evolution, not just my personal one. It's social evolution. It's cosmic tikkun.
Thank you for this. I'm hearing you speak to ways that God is not only out there in an esoteric form, but also right here in presence, in making space. Can you speak more about this?
And that's what we would call in the Jewish tradition the Holiness Project, like what we call Kiddusha. The Kiddusha Project, the Holiness Project, is mandated by the rabbis who kind of created what we call Judaism today. They implemented a kind of what someone called a normal mysticism. And by that, the scholar meant that the rabbis created a curricula of awareness building for everyday living. And so this kind of, so it looks like, the most classic point of this is 100 blessings a day. So the rabbis actually say that there's a recommended daily allowance of blessings, right? And they're like 100 a day. And a blessing literally is a formula, as you know. It's a formula of words that are said, but it could take the form of like very much like, let's say, Thich Nhat Hanh, in his community, they have gathas, which are these kind of pithy phrases that one says right before one engages in a mundane activity to kind of orient oneself. And so we Jews have a practice called bracha, blessing. The word in Hebrew, bracha, comes from the word brecha, which is a pool. And it's a way of drawing from the, let's say, the non-dual or the unseen pool of being and drawing it all the way down into this very moment as I'm about to, bite into the apple or drink a glass of water, or even, shockingly, when I go to the bathroom and I kind of, come out of the bathroom, there's a blessing for that too. A blessing for all of this miraculous body with all of its different tubes and, holes, how that works. And so there's kind of like the Jewish path is deeply embracing the possibility that every moment is a miniature Garden of Eden or Mount Sinai. Like each moment is a moment of revelation, a moment of tikkun. And the goal, if we could say the goal of Jewish mystical practice, would not be to be in a state of rapture ecstatically, although those are absolutely skillful means in order to kind of see and know and taste this thing that's being pointed to, but it is to live in this kind of this world, this very world with my, with my wife and with my kids and screaming and yelling and and diapers and budgets that need to be passed and all of that and sirens that are going off, and to be able to say, I bless that too. And that in that blessing to drop in that moment, I'm just going to let this move, to drop in that moment, to drop into a taste of that presence, right? That is ever present, right? And so the Jewish mystic is looking at the world with what I think, Swami Satchidananda said, to have real eyes is to realize. Like that the great mystic, the Baal Shem Tov, who was one of the greater Kabbalists, right, who started the Hasidic movement, which was also a movement of devotees and mystical, dancers and singers. So the Baal Shem Tov said, like, the whole point of Jewish mystical practice is to have heilige Eugen, to have holy eyes, like what Satchidananda said, to have real eyes. And so the programmatic overview is, not an ocean of mystical experience, but daily infusions and drops where you drop back in for a moment and then you go on with your day. It's kind of like you stop, and you become aware of the gift of this moment, whatever it might be, and you have this, curricula, your coffee, and you begin to really attune yourself to the infinite number of blessings that are in your day. It's not just 100, it's everything. It's this light, it's my eyes, it's my speaking, it's the fact that I'm here. The great surprise of being is responded to in our tradition with a blessing. It's like, oh, I'm here. Let's make a blessing, right? That's one piece of it.
I'm here. Let's make a blessing. Could you give us an example of a blessing for folks who are new to the practice of blessing? How does one begin?
Well, I think that if it wouldn't be in Hebrew, it would just be a way. This would be a way of being able to say, in very clear language, a thank you. And this comes back to, you and I were playing with this earlier about opening to you. That you offered an opening for people to get to know me. It's like, let me open for you. But in our tradition, opening for you is also opening to you, is opening ourselves to the divine, is both oneness but also relational. And so in the practice, I think, of blessing, one is both aware of being, completely aware of a non-differentiated available, like the reality of everything, as it were. But it also, at the same time, then is expressed as a particular receiving of blessing, receiving of this as a gift. And that just, it can be I'm aware of different spiritual paths that might be listening. Some people who don't want to say a you to God, say thank you. And some for whom the language would be, I'm aware of this moment's blessing, right? Without making it personal. The Jewish path holds both of those together and doesn't release any one of them. I think that's, that and other, let's say, Vedanta, but like there's a particular address. There's both awareness of the non-personal deity that is all it is, and then kind of thank you for this moment. And so, pick and choose, but it could be the language of, as I'm drinking, I would say, thank you for this water. I'm aware of the blessing of this water. We would say, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, shehakol naya b'dvaro.
Amen.
And in that moment, I'm available to and integrating in that moment, a profound surrender to my own vulnerability, right? This water is a gift to me. I need this water, right? And I didn't, right? It's not me. It's you, God, you goddess, you one, you with a million faces. So if you were going to start your own blessing practice, you actually would have an easier time than someone who was a traditional Jew who was kind of limited by the 100 blessings the rabbis made. You could be making blessings literally nonstop. And it could be as simple as, I'm aware of this chair. I feel blessed to be supported. Aware of, this room. I feel blessed to have shelter. Aware of, right? That could be the form of the blessing. And if you were more in the theistic vein, which I tend to be generally because for all kinds of reasons, but mostly because I feel it's really good for humanity to be in a relation with something greater than us that is then transferable to our gratitude to other beings around us. I thank you for your nodding head and your beautiful smile. And I thank you. And that's a gift for your friendship. I thank you for your efforts. I thank you for so one could literally be doing that all day. And one could start, one of my favorite blessings is the blessing around food. I think that food is a tremendously powerful place for us to bring awareness. And it can be something as simple as saying thank you before you eat, or after you eat, or just bringing awareness and saying this food is a blessing, right? May all beings be blessed with food. That kind of verbalizing becomes a kind of normal mysticism that is drawn from the practice of blessing and extending itself into any area that a person wants to elevate and to make more transparent, I think, to its grace, what it is as grace.
I love this frame of normal mysticism and the many ways we can weave attention to the sacred in each moment. You've been speaking often about the Kabbalah of Isaac Luria. I'm wondering if you'll talk about Four Worlds Judaism or a Four Worlds Jewish mystical lens.
Sure. I mean, it's so beautiful what he did and what he introduced, and it's also so amazing where it went. And I'll give credit to some people who brought it into different places. So essentially, Isaac Luria built on something a little bit earlier than him from the Zohar, which was the main work of Jewish mysticism is this incredibly beautiful, creative, running commentary on the Torah, written most likely in the 13th century by someone named Moses de Leon and maybe a group of people, but it becomes accepted by the Jewish world as the most important book of Jewish mysticism before Luria. And Luria built his own Kabbalah based on the Zohar in the 13th century. And for those who love and are curious, like, what's the Zohar? It means radiance. And it's actually available in English. It was translated by a great scholar named Daniel Matt. And it's maybe one of the great, most profoundly important works of mysticism in world mystical literature. And Daniel Matt did a masterful job translating its mythic language and its poetic language. But it's the Zohar that introduces pretty much the four-world model. This model is then taken by Luria and then later by the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of the Hasidic movement I mentioned earlier, and then most notably by my own heart, my own guru, my own teacher, Reb Zalman Schachter Shalomi of blessed memory, known as Reb Zalman, who took it into the psycho-spiritual. Let me just give the Lurianic, the Zohar, Luria, and then Reb Zalman. So in the Zohar describes what we might call a great chain of being, right? That the world, as I described, there's the multiple dimensions in which God kind of clothes or garbs God's self before becoming known as world. God moves from, pure light into manifestation in stages of unfolding. Kind of not, kind of Neoplatonic for those who study these things. There's this idea that there's an effulgence of divinity that then moves from, divinity, pure light into matter. And each dimension is called a world or a dimension of being. It's called olam in Hebrew. And it begins with atzilut, which means nearness. Then there's bria, which means the world of creation, which is more conceptual or idea. And then yitzira, which is feeling, and then asiya, which is action. In Lurianic Kabbalah and in early Kabbalah before the Hasidic movement, a lot of that was kind of outside, like the three upper worlds were not inside of us, as it were. We were in the world of asiya. We're the final product. But the world of Atzilut was like the world of the Platonic forms, maybe, and so was Bria, and then Yitzira was the world of angels, other dimensions of being, before this physical world, right? When the Hasidic movement came along, and then really Reb Zalman, my teacher, all of those things that were quote unquote outside, like the dimensions, became inside of your psychology. So we each have Atzilut. We have that, place called Bria, Yitzira, Asiya. Those four worlds correspond to spirit, mind, heart, and body. And so you can hear my teacher played with Jung's four functions, and it became basically an incredibly important way to look at the world, right? The world of my spirit place, which is the world of I call it the world of silence, like the place where silence speaks, the space between musical notes. The world of Atzilut is it's the world of even before breath. It's the world before there's a breath. And then there's the world of Bria, the world of mind, where, this conversation, we're playing with ideas and affirmations, and anything that's cognitive might be in the world of Bria. And the world of Yitzira would be emotions, like where, how I'm feeling in this moment, like what's going on, level of maybe eros or energy moving through the body. We might, when chi or other ruach is moving through the body during a yoga class, that's like Yitzira, anger, sadness, all those things are kind of where the emotions are happening in the body and in the self. And then the body, literally, the world of Asiya is like the world of tables, right? In the world of and physical objects. And one of the most profoundly important, I think, questions that the four-dimensional reality asks is, what are the needs of each one of these worlds and how are they met? And how often, my teacher used to say, and I know this in my own experience, how often we confuse the need of one world and satisfy it with what satisfies a different world. When we're feeling sad, we might, employ asiya and eat. When we're feeling, that we need intellectual, we're unclear, we're confused, we might spiritually bypass and go meditate instead of going and talking to a therapist and trying to work things through. So kind of clarifying where many of these things live helps us to also know how to feed each of these worlds and the needs that are unique to those dimensions of being.
Thank you for this explanation. It's so intricate and so clear all at the same time. How do these strands you're speaking to connect with the concept or processes of Tikkun?
Yeah, so it's obvious that there's Tikkun happening in all four of these worlds, right? When we don't want to know the truth, we're doing the work of hiding away and level of bria, the level of cognition, right? We're not allowing ourselves to know a truth. when we break a piece of our yitzir, our emotional body off, and we hide it, or we repress it, or we deny it, that's a level of yitzira. And so on. You can go through each one of those worlds. And so tikkun is like the particular tools of tikkun relate to the different worlds, right? And knowing how to release each of those worlds is a blessing, right? It's a real blessing, and a really important part of how these things are connected also in the modern world. Like, you know, if before there was psychological sophistication, we might come to a healer, a Jewish shaman, and say, you know, I'm feeling depressed. And if you're a master of the world of Bria, or the master of the world of Atzilut, you might only have those tools available to you, and you might misinterpret that depression, which is in the level of Yetzirah, and give it a spiritual, solution. You say to somebody, go say 10 Hail Marys, and I wouldn't say that, go say 20 prakim, 20 chapters of Tehillim, of Psalms. I can't tell you how many people have gone to Jewish spiritual healers still in this day with a problem that is not really on the level of Bria or of Atzilut, these two upper levels, and they give them solutions there that are based upon, I think, an erroneous understanding of the way that the heart works. And we're so blessed that, our traditions have all are limited because they're, and so we grow from the newest, experiences. So thankfully, someone who might be depressed won't just sit around reading, chapters of the book of Psalms, but will actually maybe go do some somatic experiencing and work on the trauma on that level. Or maybe that person just needs a friend and they need to talk. And that's also part of the wisdom traditions. In the Zen tradition, people would be sitting and staring at the wall, and that you can have satori, but then come right back out and you have shadow because because you're staring at your own mind without being in the dialogical space that only Yetzirah can expose. And so I think that the work of Tikkun is to give a really accurate enough map. No map is the territory, but an accurate enough map to allow us to address each of those worlds with the appropriate tool needed for that world. And when I pray, I enter into the world of Bria and Atzilut right away. And when in the presence of the divine, I say, Rafa'inu, please bring healing, God. Because I can't, that's working on a lot of levels, but I still have to go to the doctor, And so tikkun will happen, hopefully, in each world appropriately. And I think I should just say this, I think in the spiritual worlds that I've often been in, I think this confusion creates a tremendous amount of pain that is unnecessary. Like, saying that spirituality and spiritual practices can do more than what they really can do can create a tremendous amount of pain in the world. And frankly, it's very limiting. To go to the doctor is also a spiritual practice, in my opinion. And to feed your body what it needs to be fed is also, and going to the right kind of therapist who really know how to work with shadow, that's spiritual practice to me. And I don't expect Judaism or any mystical path to have everything, in its toolkit, if that makes sense.
It makes so much sense. Thank you for this, Rabbi David. Will you lead us in a short practice?
So there's a saying, and there's a phrase in the Talmud that says that God desires the heart. Rahmanah, or the compassionate one, desires the heart. And there's another phrase in the Torah that says, V'asuli migdash v'shachanti b'tocham, that God says, make a space for me, a tabernacle or a holy sacred center, and I will come and dwell in that place. Make room for me. so that I might be present to you. And so the heart is the abode of the divine. And so I invite you at this moment to bring your awareness, with your eyes closed or open, just bring awareness to the physical sensations that surround the space where the heart is now beating and gifting you with life at this physical container. Just notice any of the sensations as you bring awareness into that place. And also notice a quality or any resistance or any openness or whatever is there, and just gently hold that space in your awareness and seeing if as you breathe, you might make a little bit of space, just a little bit, as the meditation bells of the church across the street also call you to this space. And you might just say to your own heart, God wants my heart. Compassion wants to live in my heart. And now more intentionally breathing into your heart, making room with each inhale. Just gently inviting a little bit more space for whatever compassion and the divine might bring into your life, into this space. Just breathing gently in. God wants my heart. God wants my heart. And so whatever blessing that might arise, that just practice a blessing or an affirmation. May I be open to receive God's light. May I be open to receive the divine light. May I make space for what is not yet recognized in my own heart and in my life and in the life of the world. May we be open to receive the light, to see and to recognize the gift of this moment. May the one who makes peace between all pieces and all parts be brought together. May the one radiate into each and every heart. May we realize with our real eyes the gift of life. Thank you.
Amen. Amen. May we realize the gift of life. Thank you, Rabbi David, for this gorgeous practice. For folks who want to connect more deeply with your work, tell us about your offerings or how they might tap in more to these strands.
So I think I have a number of courses that I taught on the Shift Network that are available for folks. The way of Kabbalah And here also in the community that I started in New York City, Romemu, 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 me and you, romemu.org. And so we're here in New York City. We're also on YouTube. We're also on Facebook, and all the ways that, my presence is sent out, a lot of sermons that I've given, a lot of courses I've taught. And I'm also teaching at the 92nd Street Y on the Upper East Side of New York City at the Brofman Center. So lots of different ways to connect. And I look forward to teaching many of these things to anybody who's interested to share the gift of Judaism and the way of the Jewish mystic.
It's such a gift always to pray with you in those ways, and such a gift to be in conversation with you here. Thank you for all that you have shared. It's been such a heart-opening and blessing-activated time.
Awesome. My pleasure. Thank you.